In the serene village of St. Mary Mead, a single erased note in a church choir's music sheet shatters the harmony, sending conductor Reginald Hawthorne collapsing in shock. As whispers of sabotage ripple through the pews, Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of ambition and jealousy. From smudged fingerprints to hidden rivalries, she uncovers the truth. The organist, Lionel Drake, driven by a burning desire to lead, tampered with the music to discredit his rival. In this tale of village secrets, one sharp-edged spinster restores harmony, proving that even the smallest note can reveal the darkest motives. The discordant note, the late afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Bartholomew's Church, casting a mosaic of crimson and gold across the worn oak pews. In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, where life moved with the gentle predictability of a Sunday hymn, the church was the heart of communal pride, and its choir a source of local renown. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her customary spot near the back, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the choir's warm-up. Scales observed the scene with her usual unobtrusive acuity. Her needles clicked rhythmically, a delicate scarf taking shape, but her eyes, bright and unyielding despite her years, missed nothing. The choir, a small but dedicated ensemble, stood in neat rows before the altar, their voices rising under the meticulous direction of Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, a man of middle years, with a lean frame and a shock of prematurely white hair. Mr. Hawthorne was known for his exacting standards. His baton moved with the precision of a metronome, coaxing harmonies that seemed to lift the very rafters. The sopranos, led by the formidable Mrs. Elspeth Grayson, trilled with confidence, while the tenors and altos followed, their notes blending into a tapestry of sound. The organ, played by Mr. Lionel Drake, hummed softly in the background, a steady foundation for the choir's efforts. Miss Marple's attention, however, was not solely on the music. She noted the small tensions that rippled beneath the surface. Mrs. Grayson's sharp glance at the shy alto, Miss Clara Henshaw, who faltered on a high note. Mr. Thomas Biddle's nervous fidgeting as he adjusted his spectacles, and Mr. Drake's occasional, almost imperceptible pause at the organ, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. These were the details, Miss Marple knew, that often revealed more than words. Village life, she had long observed, was a microcosm of human nature, where petty rivalries and unspoken ambitions could simmer as fiercely as in any grand drama. The choir was rehearsing for the upcoming Harvest Festival, a cherished event that drew visitors from neighboring villages. Today's piece, a complex arrangement of all things bright and beautiful, demanded precision, and Mr. Hawthorne was relentless. "Again, sopranos," he called, his voice crisp. "The crescendo must soar, not stumble." The choir reset, and the music swelled once more. Miss Marple's needles paused as she sensed a shift in the air, a subtle discord that was not musical. Her gaze fell on the music stand before Mr. Hawthorne, where a single sheet trembled slightly, as if caught in a draught. Then it happened, as the choir reached the climax of the hymn. A jarring dissonance shattered the harmony. A single note, sharp and wrong, cut through the melody like a knife. Mr. Hawthorne froze, his baton suspended mid-air. His face, already pale, drained of colour. He clutched his chest, his eyes wide with shock, and with a faint gasp, he crumpled to the floor. The choir's voices faltered, replaced by cries of alarm. Mrs. Grayson rushed forward, her usual composure, fraying, while Mr. Biddle stood rooted, his hands trembling. Miss Clara Henshaw let out a small sob, and Mr. Drake's fingers lingered on the organ keys. the notes fading into an eerie silence. Miss Marple rose quietly, slipping her knitting into her bag. She moved with the unhurried grace of one accustomed to observing rather than acting, yet her mind was already at work. The vicar, Mr. Clement, appeared from the vestry, his kindly face creased with concern as he knelt beside Mr. Hawthorne. "Fetch Dr. Haydock," he called to a hovering Choy boy who scampered off. The choir milled about, their whispers a low hum of speculation. Sabotage, some murmured. An accident, others insisted. Miss Marple's eyes, however, were drawn to the music stand, where the offending sheet had fallen to the stone floor. She stooped, her movements deliberate, and retrieved it. The sheet was unremarkable save for one detail, a single note. A high C had been erased, leaving a faint smudge of pencil lead. The erasure was not careless but precise, as if meant to disrupt. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. She recalled a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, when a tampered recipe had caused a minor scandal at the Women's Institute. Small acts, she knew, could mask great intentions. As the choir dispersed and Mr. Hawthorne was carried to the vestry to await the doctor, Miss Marple tucked the sheet into her handbag. "A note erased," she murmured to herself, "is a note that speaks." She glanced at the choir members, now scattering like leaves in the wind. Mrs. Grayson's voice carried, sharp with indignation, while Mr. Biddle avoided eye contact, his nervousness palpable. Mr. Drake lingered at the organ, his expression unreadable, though Miss Marple noted the tightness in his jaw. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, approached, her face anxious. "Oh, Miss Marple, what a dreadful shock. Poor Mr. Hawthorne. Do you think it was merely nerves?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle but non-committal. "Perhaps, my dear," she said, her tone soothing. "But music, like people, can hide its discords until the wrong note is struck." She patted Mrs. Clement's arm, her mind already tracing the threads of this unexpected drama. The church, so serene moments ago, now hummed with secrets, and Miss Marple knew that unravelling them would require her keenest attention. Chapter 2. The scene of the faint, the vestry of St. Bartholomew's Church, with its heavy oak table and faded tapestry of St. Cecilia, was an unlikely stage for drama. Yet it was here that the aftermath of Mr. Reginald Hawthorne's collapse unfolded. The air was thick with the scent of old hymnals and wax polish, and the faint echo of the choir's interrupted rehearsal lingered like a ghost. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a straight-backed chair near the window, her knitting bag at her feet, observed the flurry of activity with her characteristic calm. Her eyes, bright and unclouded by her years, took in every detail: the vicar's anxious pacing, the choir members' hushed whispers, and the music sheet, now tucked safely in her handbag, its erased note a silent accusation. Dr. Haydock, a robust man with a practical manner, arrived promptly, his black medical bag swinging as he strode into the vestry. He knelt beside Mr. Hawthorne, who lay on a makeshift pallet of cushions, his face ashen but his breathing steady. The choir conductor, still in his black waistcoat, looked diminished without his baton, his usual air of command replaced by a vulnerability that Miss Marple found oddly revealing. She had seen such transformations before in St. Mary Mead moments when a person's public mask slipped, exposing the frailties beneath. "Shock, most likely," Dr. Haydock announced, his voice carrying the authority of long experience. His heart sound enough, but something gave him a turn. Rest and a brandy should set him right. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, hovered nearby, her hands wringing a lace handkerchief. "Oh, Dr. Haydock, is it serious? Poor Mr. Hawthorne, he was so splendid just moments ago." Her voice trembled, but Miss Marple noted the glance she cast toward the choir members, as if seeking the source of the disruption. The vicar, Mr. Clement, a gentle soul more suited to sermons than scandals, murmured assurances, though his brow remained furrowed. "Perhaps a mistake in the music," he suggested, half to himself. "Reginald is so particular about perfection." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "Perfection," she said softly, "can be a fragile thing." Her words were lost in the rustle of movement as the choir members gathered at the vestry's edge, their faces a study in varied emotions. Mrs. Elspeth Grayson, her soprano voice as commanding off stage as on, stood with arms crossed, her lips pursed in disapproval. Mr. Thomas Biddle, the nervous tenor, clutched his hymn book like a shield, his eyes darting toward the door. Miss Clara Henshaw, the shy alto, seemed to shrink into herself, her hands twisting in her lap. And Mr. Lionel Drake, the organist, leaned against the wall, his expression one of studied indifference, though Miss Marple caught the flicker of his gaze toward the music stand where the offending sheet had fallen. Mrs. Clement, ever the gracious hostess, turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, you were there when it happened. You've such a knack for noticing things. Do you think it was an accident, or something else?" Her voice dropped to a whisper on the last words, as if reluctant to voice suspicion in the sanctity of the church. The choir members stiffened, their attention sharpening, and Miss Marple felt the weight of their scrutiny. She adjusted her shawl, her movements deliberate, buying a moment to choose her words. "An accident, perhaps," she said, her tone mild, "but music, like people, can be tampered with. A single wrong note can disrupt the whole harmony." Her eyes met Mrs. Grayson's briefly, noting the soprano's quick frown. As if the suggestion of tampering was a personal affront, the vicar, eager to restore calm, clapped his hands. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Reginald will recover, and we'll sort this out. Miss Marple, would you stay? Your insight might be invaluable." Miss Marple inclined her head, her agreement unspoken but clear. She had no intention of leaving, not when the air was thick with unspoken tensions. She recalled a similar incident years ago in St. Mary Mead, when a tampered flower arrangement at the village fete had revealed a web of jealousy among the gardeners. Small acts, she knew, could be the threads that unraveled greater secrets. Dr. Haydock administered a small dose of brandy to Mr. Hawthorne, who stirred, his eyes fluttering open. What happened?" he murmured, his voice weak but laced with indignation. "The music it was wrong. That note." He trailed off, his hand gesturing vaguely toward the music stand. Miss Marple's interest sharpened. She rose, excusing herself with a polite smile, and approached the stand, now abandoned in the choir loft. The remaining music sheets were neatly stacked, but the one she had retrieved lay in her handbag, its smudged surface a puzzle waiting to be solved. She returned to the vestry, her mind already tracing the outlines of a motive. Mrs. Grayson, unable to contain herself, spoke up. "It's outrageous. Someone must have altered the sheet. Reginald's too meticulous for such an error." Her tone implied accusation, though her eyes avoided her fellow choir members. Mr. Biddle stammered, I didn't touch anything. I was just singing." His protestation was too quick, Miss Marple noted, like a schoolboy caught near a broken window. Miss Henshaw said nothing, her silence louder than words, while Mr. Drake offered a casual shrug. "Mistakes happen," he said, his voice smooth. "Perhaps someone was careless." His nonchalance was too studied, and Miss Marple's memory flicked to a young man in St. Mary Mead, who had feigned indifference to mask his guilt over a stolen bicycle. Mrs. Clement, sensing the rising tension, suggested tea. "It'll calm everyone's nerves," she said, bustling toward the vestry's small kettle. As she prepared the tray, Miss Marple took the opportunity to observe the choir more closely. She approached Miss Henshaw, whose pale face and downcast eyes suggested a burden. "You sang beautifully, my dear," Miss Marple said kindly. "It must be difficult keeping up with such a demanding conductor." Clara flushed, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her skirt. "Mr. Hawthorne is particular," she whispered. "He doesn't like mistakes." Her words were hesitant, but Miss Marple sensed a deeper fear. She made a mental note to speak with Clara alone, suspecting the young woman might know more than she let on. The tea was served, and the choir members sipped in uneasy silence. Mr. Hawthorne, now propped up with cushions, sipped his brandy and muttered about the disgrace of the rehearsal. Miss Marple, seated beside Mrs. Clement, drew the music sheet from her handbag, careful to handle it by the edges. The erased nota high C stood out starkly, the smudges around it suggesting a hasty hand. She recalled a conversation with her nephew Raymond, a writer with a penchant for mysteries, who had once described how a single clue could unravel a plot. This sheet, she thought, was such a clue. "Mrs. Clement," she said quietly, "might I borrow this sheet for a day or two? It may hold answers." Mrs. Clement, flustered but trusting, nodded. "Of course, Jane, but do be careful, it's part of the choir's collection." Miss Marple smiled reassuringly, though her mind was already turning to Constable Reed, the village policeman. He was a young man, earnest but untested, and she suspected he would need convincing to take the matter seriously. The smudges, she reasoned, might yield fingerprints, though she knew the process was Still, in St. Mary Mead, where gossip was as reliable as evidence, such clues could point the way as the choir dispersed. Mr. Drake lingered, his fingers brushing the vestry's tapestry as if deep in thought. Miss Marple watched him, noting the restless energy in his movements. She had seen such restlessness before in a shop assistant who had pilfered from the till, his guilt betrayed by his inability to stand still. "Mr. Drake," she called softly, "you play the organ so well. It must be a challenge, keeping pace with Mr. Hawthorne's vision." Her tone was admiring, but her eyes were sharp. Drake's smile was quick, almost too quick. "It's a labor of love," he said, but his voice held a note of strain. "Reginald has his ways, but we manage." Miss Marple nodded, filing away his response. Ambition, she knew, could be a subtle poison, and Mr. Drake's ambition was no secret in the village. The vestry emptied, leaving only Miss Marple, Mrs. Clement, and the vicar. Mr. Clement sighed, rubbing his temples. "I hope this doesn't disrupt the harvest festival. The choir is our pride." Miss Marple's needles, retrieved from her bag, began to click again. "Pride, Mr. Clement, can be a delicate thing," she said, "but I'm sure we'll find the truth. It's often hidden in the smallest details." She thought of the erased note, the smudged fingerprints, and the choir's uneasy glances. Someone, she was certain, had intended to disrupt more than a rehearsal. The question was why. As she walked home through the twilight, the village of St. Mary Mead settling into its evening calm, Miss Marple's mind was far from restful. The church, with its ancient stones and sacred air, had become a stage for human frailty. She recalled a long-ago incident at the Women's Institute, where a tampered recipe had sparked a feud that revealed a deeper betrayal. The erased note. She suspected was no mere prank but a calculated act, meant to unsettle Mr. Hawthorne and perhaps the choir itself. She would attend the next rehearsal, she decided, her knitting bag a quiet companion to her sharp observations. The truth, like a melody, would emerge in time, note by careful note. Chapter 3. The Choir's Secrets. The morning sun spilled through the latticed windows of the vicarage, casting a soft glow on the chintz curtains and the polished mahogany of Mrs. Clement's sitting room. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a cushioned armchair, sipped her tea with the delicate precision of one who never rushed, her knitting needles resting quietly in her lap. The events of the previous day's rehearsal lingered in her mind, sharp and clear as the notes of thee disrupted him. The erased note, the smudged music sheet, and Mr. Reginald Hawthorne's dramatic collapse were not, she was certain, the work of chance. In St. Mary Mead, where the surface of village life was as placid as a mill pond, undercurrents of ambition and resentment often ran deep. Miss Marple, with her unassuming air and keen insight, was adept at navigating such waters. Mrs. Clement, bustling about with a tray of scones and a fresh pot of tea, was in a state of gentle agitation. "Oh, Jane, it's all so unsettling," she said, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. "Mr. Hawthorne is recovering, thank goodness, but the choir is in such a state. Everyone's whispering about that wretched music sheet. Do you think it was deliberate?" Her eyes, wide with the thrill of village intrigue, sought Miss Marple's calm gaze. Miss Marple set her teacup down, her expression serene but her mind alert. "People, my dear, are rarely as simple as they seem," she said. "A small act, like erasing a note, can be a window into larger motives. I've seen it before, misplaced word in a letter, a snipped thread in a quilt. It's the small things that betray the heart." She thought of a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, where a tampered entry in the church flower rota had revealed a feud between two parishioners. The choir, she suspected, was a similar tapestry, its harmony woven with threads of rivalry and secrets. Mrs. Clement leaned forward, lowering her voice. "The choir members are all so different. Jane, I don't know where to begin. Mrs. Grayson, with her airs, she thinks herself the queen of the sopranos. Mr. Biddle is so nervous, always fidgeting. Miss Henshaw hardly says a word, poor thing. And Mr. Drake," she hesitated, her brow creasing. "He's talented, but there's something about him. He's been pushing for new hymns, modern ones, and Mr. Hawthorne won't hear of it. They've had words, you know." Miss Marple nodded, her memory cataloguing the details. She had observed the choir members closely during the rehearsal, noting their interactions like a botanist studying rare specimens. Mrs. Elspeth Grayson, with her commanding presence and sharp tongue, was a force in the choir, her soprano voice a source of pride but also contention. Mr. Thomas Biddle, the tenor, seemed perpetually on edge, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he glanced nervously at his fellow singers. Miss Clara Henshaw, the alto, was a study in reticence, her eyes downcast as if guarding a secret, and Mr. Lionel Drake, the organist, had an air of restless ambition, his fingers dancing on the keys with a flair that suggested he craved a larger stage than St. Bartholomew's organ loft. "Tell me more about Mr. Drake," Miss Marple said, her tone conversational but her interest keen. "He seems dedicated to his music." Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. "Oh, he is, but he's ambitious, Jane. He's been with the choir for years, always in Mr. Hawthorne's shadow. He suggested changes, new arrangements, modern pieces, but Reginald is so traditional. They argued last month, quite loudly, in the vestry. Lionel said something about the choir needing new blood, and Reginald took it personally. I shouldn't gossip, but... She trailed off, her cheeks flushing. Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. It's not gossip, my dear, but observation, and observations can be most illuminating. She recalled a young curate in St. Mary Mead who had clashed with the vicar over sermon styles, his ambition masking a deeper discontent. Mr. Drake, she suspected, might harbour similar feelings. His role as organist, while vital, placed him behind the scenes, a supporting player to Mr. Hawthorne's starring role. Ambition, Miss Marple knew, could fester into resentment, and resentment could lead to acts as subtle as an erased note. The vicarage door opened, and the vicar, Mr. Clement, entered, his face weary but kind. "Jane, I'm so glad you're here," he said, sinking into a chair. "Reginald is much improved, but he's insisting on resuming rehearsals tomorrow. I'm worried it's too soon. And this business with the music sheet people are talking. The choir's harmony is fraying." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what to make of it." Miss Marple's needles, now retrieved from her bag, began to click softly. "Harmony, Mr. Clement, is a delicate balance," she said. "In a choir, as in a village, one discordant note can unsettle the whole. I'd like to attend tomorrow's rehearsal, if I may. It might help to see the choir in action again." "Hari questo ws poraito hari, sistema gentoru," her tone suggesting she was merely curious, though her mind was already piecing together possibilities. The vicar nodded eagerly. "Of course, Jane, your presence would be a comfort to us all." He hesitated, then added, "Do you think this incident was intentional?" "I think," Miss Marple said carefully, "that we must consider all possibilities. A music sheet does not erase itself." She did not mention the smudged fingerprints. Not yet. She wanted to observe the choir further, to let their secrets reveal themselves naturally. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned, patience often uncovered what haste overlooked, as the vicar and his wife discussed arrangements for the next rehearsal. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the choir members. Mrs. Grayson's imperious manner suggested a woman who brooked no rivals. But had she the subtlety for such a prank? Mr. Biddle's nervousness could be mere temperament, or it could mask guilt. Miss Henshaw's silence might hide knowledge, or simply shyness. And Mr. Drake's ambition was palpable, his casual demeanour a thin veil over a restless spirit. She recalled a village shopkeeper who had sabotaged a competitor's display, his motive a desire for prominence. Could Mr. Drake, she wondered, have sought to undermine Mr. Hawthorne's authority? Mrs. Clement, sensing Miss Marple's distraction, offered another scone. "You're deep in thought, Jane. Have you an idea about it all?" Miss Marple took the scone, her smile gentle. "Ideas, my dear, are like seeds. They need time to grow." She took a delicate bite, her mind already planning her next steps. She would visit Constable Reed that afternoon to inquire about the fingerprints. She would speak with Miss Henshaw, whose reticence intrigued her, and she would watch Mr. Drake closely, for his ambition, she suspected, was the key to the choir's discord. As she left the vicarage, the village of St. Mary Mead lay quiet under the midday sun, its cottages and lanes a picture of tranquility. But Miss Marple knew better. Beneath the calm, secrets stirred, and she would find them, note by careful note. Chapter 4. The Fingerprint Puzzle. The afternoon light slanted through the ivy-clad windows of St. Mary Mead's police station. A sturdy stone building nestled behind the village green, its interior a study in orderly simplicity. The air carried the faint must of old ledgers and the sharper bite of polish. a testament to Constable Reed's diligent, if somewhat methodical, approach to his duties. Miss Jane Marple sat primly on a wooden chair, its creak a quiet echo of the village's unhurried rhythm. In her gloved hands, she held the tampered music sheet, its erased high C and smudged edges a silent challenge. Her eyes, bright and unclouded despite her years, studied the young constable across the desk, his youthful earnestness tempered by a skepticism she knew she must overcome. Constable Reed, his uniform crisp but his expression dubious, leaned forward, his fingers tapping a pencil against a blotter. "Miss Marple," he began, his tone polite, yet tinged with impatience. "I understand your concern, but a smudged music sheet hardly seems a matter for the police. Mr. Hawthorne's collapse was unfortunate, but Dr. Haydock says it was shock, not a crime. Surely this is just a choir mishap." His cap, slightly askew, betrayed his discomfort with the elderly woman's insistence, and Miss Marple noted it with the same quiet acuity she applied to village gossip. Her smile was gentle, almost disarming, but her voice held a steady resolve. "My dear constable," she said, "it is often the smallest things that reveal the greatest truths. A smudge, an erased note, these are not mere accidents, but threads in a larger pattern, like a dropped stitch in a scarf that unravels the whole." She paused, her mind flickering to a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, where a single tampered entry in a church register had exposed a petty theft. "I wonder if you might indulge me and examine these smudges. Fingerprints, you know, can speak when words do not." Reed's brow furrowed, his fingers stilling on the pencil. He was new to the village, eager to prove his competence, but wary of chasing what he saw as fanciful theories. Yet Miss Marple's reputation, whispered in the village as a blend of spinsterly charm and uncanny insight, gave him pause. "Very well," he said at last, his tone reluctant. "I'll dust it for prints, but our kit's basic, and smudges rarely give clear results. Don't expect miracles." He reached for a small fingerprinting kit, his movements deliberate, as if hoping to dissuade her with the slowness of bureaucracy. Miss Marple watched as he sprinkled fine powder over the music sheet, the smudges darkening into faint, swirling patterns. The prints were partial, blurred by haste or carelessness, but their presence confirmed her suspicion. The erasure was no idle prank, but a deliberate act meant to disrupt. "Thank you, Constable," she said, her voice warm but firm. "Even a partial clue can light the way, like a candle in a fog." She did not press further, knowing that insistence might close his mind. Instead, she tucked the sheet back into her handbag, promising to return it to the vicar. As she rose, she added, "Might we keep this between us? The village, you know, thrives on whispers, and whispers can obscure the truth." Reed nodded, though his expression suggested he still viewed the matter as trivial. Miss Marple stepped out into the village green, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the cobblestones, and paused to gather her thoughts. The fingerprints, though blurred, were a clue, a thread in the tapestry of the choirs. Discord, the erased high C, chosen with precision, suggested a motive tied to Mr. Hawthorne's exacting standards. She thought of a village baker who had once tampered with a rival's dough, his small act of sabotage revealing a deeper envy. The choir, she suspected, harbored similar resentments, and her task was to find the hand behind the smudge. Her next destination was the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement had arranged an informal tea for the choir members, a gesture meant to soothe nerves but likely to stir secrets. As she walked, her steps light despite the weight of her thoughts, Miss Marple considered the choir's dynamics. Mrs. Elspeth Grayson, with her commanding soprano and imperious air, wielded influence but lacked the finesse for such a subtle act. Mr. Thomas Biddle, the nervous tenor, seemed too flustered to plan a precise sabotage, though his anxiety hinted at something unspoken. Miss Clara Henshaw, the shy alto, was a puzzle. Her silence might conceal knowledge or merely timidity. And Mr. Lionel Drake, the organist, with his restless ambition and quick smile, stood out as the most likely culprit, his desire to lead, a motive that resonated with the tampered sheet. The vicarage garden was a riot of late summer blooms, dahlias and roses swaying in the breeze. Mrs. Clement greeted Miss Marple at the gate, her face a mix of warmth and nervous energy. "Jane, you're a blessing," she said, ushering her toward a Rothian table set with tea things. "The choir's in such a state. Mr. Hawthorne's insisting on rehearsals tomorrow, but everyone's on edge. Mrs. Grayson's been sharp, Mr. Biddle's a bundle of nerves, and Clara looks ready to bolt. Even Mr. Drake's quieter than usual." Her voice dropped, her eyes searching Miss Marple's face for reassurance. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag at her side, and surveyed the gathering. Mrs. Grayson held court near the teapot, her voice carrying over the clink of cups, her demeanor as commanding as her soprano. Mr. Biddle sat at the edge, his fingers twisting a napkin into knots, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Miss Henshaw perched silently, her eyes fixed on her lap, her hands clasped tightly. Mr. Drake leaned against a tree, his casual posture belied by the sharp glance he cast toward the others. A fox among doves. Mrs. Clement poured tea, her chatter a nervous attempt to fill the silence. "I do hope Mr. Hawthorne's feeling better," she said, passing a cup to Miss Marple. "Such a shock, that rehearsal. Do you think it was just a mistake, Jane?" Her question was innocent, but Miss Marple noted the way the choir members' heads turned, their attention sudden and sharp. "A mistake, perhaps," Miss Marple said, stirring her tea with a delicate hand. "But mistakes, I find, are often cloaked intentions. A single note erased, a smudge left behind, these are not careless acts." She let her words linger, watching the reactions. Mrs. Grayson's lips tightened, as if offended by the suggestion of foul play. Mr. Biddle's napkin tore slightly, his fingers stilling in a moment of panic. Miss Henshaw's gaze flickered upward, then down, a fleeting sign of unease. Drake's smile was quick, almost too quick, as he said, "Rehearsals are chaotic, Miss Marple. Sheets get marked, notes get missed. It's nothing sinister." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression benign. "Of course, Mr. Drake," she said, "but a high C is such a particular note to erase, don't you think? Especially one Mr. Hawthorne was so keen to perfect." She sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving his face, and noted the slight tightening of his jaw, a telltale sign of discomfort. She recalled a young man in St. Mary Mead who had sabotaged a rival's garden, his guilt betrayed by a similar tension in his manner. Ambition, she thought, could be a restless companion, and Drake's was a melody she could almost hear. Mrs. Grayson seized the moment, her voice ringing with indignation. "If someone tampered with the music, it's a disgrace to the choir," she declared, her eyes sweeping the group. "Reginald's standards are what make us exceptional. This sort of thing is unforgivable." Her gaze lingered on Miss Henshaw, who flinched, and Miss Marple filed the exchange away. Was Mrs. Grayson's sharpness a deflection, or did she genuinely suspect another? The soprano's authority, she knew, could mask her own motives. Mr. Biddle stammered, his voice high with nerves. I didn't touch the sheets. I was just trying to keep up." His protest was earnest, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted toward Drake, as if seeking reassurance or fearing accusation. Miss Henshaw remained silent, her hands twisting in her lap, and Miss Marple resolved to speak with her alone. The young woman's reticence, she suspected, was not mere shyness, but a shield for something deeper. As the tea party continued, Miss Marple steered the conversation to lighter topics: the harvest festival, the choir's repertoire, her questions, designed to probe without alarming. She learned that Drake had clashed with Mr. Hawthorne over a modern hymn, a proposal dismissed as frivolous. "Reginald's stuck in the past," Drake said, his tone light but edged with frustration. "The choir could be so much more." Miss Marple nodded, her smile sympathetic, but her mind catalogued his words, a confirmation of his ambition. The gathering drew to a close, the choir members dispersing with polite farewells that masked that unease. Miss Marple lingered, helping Mrs. Clement clear the table, her thoughts on the music sheet. "Mrs. Clement," she said quietly, "might I visit the church tomorrow? I'd like to examine the music collection. There may be more to learn from those sheets." Her request was casual, but her intent was clear. The smudges, the erased note, were clues that needed context. Mrs. Clement agreed eagerly, her trust in Miss Marple unwavering. As Miss Marple walked home through the twilight, the village of St. Mary Mead settling into its evening hush, her mind was far from calm. The fingerprints, blurred but suggestive, pointed to a deliberate hand. The high C, erased with care, was a strike at Mr. Hawthorne's pride, a motive rooted in rivalry. Drake's ambition was the loudest note, but Mrs. Grayson's sharpness, Biddle's nerves, and Clara's silence were all part of the melody. She recalled a village seamstress. WHO had uncovered a theft by noticing a single mismatched thread. The choir's secrets, she was certain, would unravel in time, if she followed the clues with care at her cottage. Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm as she pondered the puzzle. The music sheet lay on her table, its smudges, a silent challenge. She would attend the rehearsal tomorrow, she decided, and watch the choir closely. Drake's ambition, Clara's reticence, Biddle's anxiety was a thread in the tapestry, and she would weave them together, stitch by careful stitch. The truth, like a hymn, was waiting to be sung, and Miss Marple was determined to find its tune. Chapter 5. The organist's ambition. The late morning air in St. Mary Mead carried the crisp scent of autumn, with leaves drifting lazily across the churchyard of St. Bartholomew's. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly draped over her shoulders, made her way to the church, her steps measured but purposeful. The tampered music sheet, safely tucked in her handbag, weighed on her mind, its smudged fingerprints and erased high C forming a riddle that demanded solving. The choir's rehearsal was set to resume that afternoon, with Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, determined to reclaim his baton despite his recent collapse. Miss Marple, however, was more interested in the choir's undercurrents than its harmonies, and her thoughts were fixed on Mr. Lionel Drake, the organist, whose ambitions seemed to hum beneath his polished exterior like a pedal note held too long. The church was quiet when she arrived, its ancient stones absorbing the sounds of the village beyond. The organ loft, perched above the choir stalls, was Mr. Drake's domain, and it was here she found him, his fingers dancing across the keys in a cascade of notes that filled the nave with solemn grandeur. The music was modern, a stark contrast to Mr. Hawthorne's preferred hymns. and Miss Marple noted the fervour in Drake's playing, as if he was staking a claim to the church's very soul. She paused at the foot of the loft's narrow staircase, her presence unobtrusive, her knitting bag a familiar prop that disarmed suspicion. "Mr. Drake," she called softly, her voice carrying just enough to rise above the organ's hum. "What?" "A splendid piece, quite different from our usual fare." Her tone was admiring, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing, not the slight startle in his posture, nor the quick glance he cast her way before his hands stilled on the keys. He turned, his smile as smooth as the polished wood of the organ. "Miss Marple," he said, rising from the bench, "just practicing something new. A bit of Vaughan Williams. Too bold for Mr. Hawthorne, I'm afraid." His voice held a trace of mockery, quickly masked by a chuckle. "What brings you here? So early?" Miss Marple climbed the stairs with surprising agility, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "Oh, I often visit the church for a moment's peace," she said, settling onto a nearby chair, "and I confess, I'm intrigued by yesterday's incident. That erased note, it was so peculiar, don't you think?" She drew the music sheet from her handbag, holding it delicately, as if it were a fragile relic. A high C, gone. It must have been quite a shock for poor Mr. Hawthorne. Drake's smile flickered, a momentary lapse that Miss Marple noted with interest. "A prank, most likely," he said, leaning casually against the organ. "Someone's idea of a joke. Rehearsals can get tense. You know people play silly tricks." His fingers brushed the keys, a restless gesture. And Miss Marple recalled a young clerk in St. Mary Mead who had fidgeted similarly when questioned about a missing ledger page. Guilt, she knew, often betrayed itself in such small movements. "Perhaps," she said, her tone mild. "But it was such a precise act, don't you think? To erase just one note, and one so critical to Mr. Hawthorne's arrangement." She tilted her head, her eyes meeting his with a deceptive simplicity. "You must see all sorts of things from up here, Mr. Drake. The choir, the music stands. Nothing escapes the organist's view, I imagine." Drake's laugh was light, but it rang hollow. "I'm too busy with the pedals to notice much," he said. "Besides, I leave the conducting to Reginald. He's the one who insists on perfection." The words carried a faint edge, and Miss Marple's memory stirred, recalling a village carpenter who had undermined a rival's work out of envy. Ambition, she thought, could curdle into something darker, especially when confined to the shadows of another's spotlight. She shifted the conversation, her questions gentle but probing. "You've been with the choir for some time, haven't you? It must be rewarding, though I suppose it's challenging to work under such a particular conductor." Her pause was deliberate, inviting confidences, and she watched as Drake's expression tightened, his casual air fraying at the edges. "Reginald's a stickler," he admitted, his voice low. "He clings to tradition like it's scripture. No room for new ideas, no chance for the choir to grow." He caught himself, his smile returning. "But we manage. The Harvest Festival will be splendid, as always." His words were smooth, but Miss Marple noted the flicker of resentment in his eyes. Like a spark in dry tinder, she nodded sympathetically, her fingers brushing the music sheet. "I suppose it's natural to want to leave one's mark," she said. "In a village like St. Mary Mead, everyone has their role, but not everyone is content with it." She thought of a local baker who had once tampered with a rival's dough, driven by a desire to be the village's best. Drake's ambition, she suspected, was of a similar strain, musical, yes, but laced with a hunger for control. As she spoke, She drew the music sheet closer, letting the smudges catch the light. "These fingerprints," she said, almost to herself, "are so curious. Constable Reed thinks they might tell us something, though he's not sure they're clear enough. Still, it's odd, isn't it? Someone handled this sheet with such haste." Her tone was musing, but her gaze was fixed on Drake, watching for any sign of unease. His fingers faltered on the organ keys, a single sour note escaping before he recovered. "Fingerprints," he said, his voice steady but his eyes narrowing. "People touch the sheets all the time, choir members, the vicar, even the cleaners. It's probably nothing." His dismissal was quick, but Miss Marple noted the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands lingered on the keys as if anchoring. "Himself, of course," she said, folding the sheet away. "I'm sure it's nothing serious, just an old lady's curiosity." She smiled, her expression disarming, but her mind was cataloguing every detail Drake's fleeting discomfort. His quick deflection, his underlying frustration with Mr. Hawthorne. She rose, thanking him for the chat, and descended the loft stairs, her steps as light as her thoughts were heavy. Outside, the churchyard was bathed in sunlight, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The erased note was no mere prank, she was certain. It was a calculated strike, designed to unsettle Mr. Hawthorne and perhaps discredit his leadership. Drake's ambition, so evident in his words and manner, made him a likely suspect, but she needed more than suspicion. The fingerprints, blurred though they were, might yet yield answers, and she resolved to press Constable Reed for further analysis. Her next stop was the village shop, where Miss Clara Henshaw worked part-time, her quiet demeanour a contrast to the choir's more vocal members. Miss Marple entered the shop, the bell jangling softly, and found Clara behind the counter, arranging jars of preserves with meticulous care. The young woman's face brightened at the sight of Miss Marple, though her eyes held a trace of wariness. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, her tone warm. "I was just passing by and thought I'd see how you're faring after yesterday's excitement." She selected a jar of marmalade, feigning indecision, and watched as Clara's hands trembled slightly, betraying her nerves. "It was awful," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Hawthorne collapsing like that tie thought he was gone." She busied herself with the jars, avoiding Miss Marple's gaze, and Miss Marple noted the flush creeping up her neck. "It must have been a shock," Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. "You're so quiet in the choir, Clara, but I imagine you notice things. Did you see anyone near the music stand before the rehearsal? Or perhaps someone acting oddly?" Her question was gentle, but her eyes were keen, missing nothing. Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on a jar. I don't know," she said. "Everyone was busy, you know, getting ready. But," she paused, her voice dropping lower, "Mr. Drake was there early, arranging the sheets. I saw him at the stand, but I didn't think anything of it." Her words came in a rush, as if unburdening herself, and Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "Mr. Drake, you say?" she prompted, her tone encouraging. "He's so dedicated, isn't he? Always at the organ, always preparing." She recalled a shy housemaid in St. Mary Mead who had overheard a theft being planned but hesitated to speak, fearing reprisal. Clara's reticence, she suspected, stemmed from a similar fear. Clara nodded, her eyes still on the jars. "He's intense," she said. "He wants to lead the choir, you know. He said so when Mr. Hawthorne isn't around. He thinks he'd do better." She stopped abruptly, as if realizing she'd said too much, and Miss Marple smiled. Reassuringly, "You've a good eye, Clara," she said. "It's the quiet ones who see the most, I find." She paid for the marmalade, her movements deliberate, giving Clara time to relax. As she left the shop, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Clara's observation placed Drake at the music stand, a detail that aligned with her suspicions. But she needed more, something to tie the fingerprints to Drake, something to confirm his motive. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her window, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. The music sheet lay on her table, its smudges a silent challenge. She thought of the choir, each member a note in a complex melody, their secrets hidden in the spaces between. Drake's ambition was the loudest note, but was it the only one? Mrs. Grayson's authority, Mr. Biddle's nerves, Clara's silence, each could play a part. She recalled a village gardener who had sabotaged a rival's roses, his motive a blend of envy and pride. Drake's desire to lead, she suspected, was fueled by a similar mix, but she needed proof. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across her garden, Miss Marple resolved to attend the rehearsal that afternoon. She would watch Drake closely, noting his interactions, his reactions, the fingerprints, the erased note, the choir's tensions. These were threads in a tapestry, and she would weave them together, stitch by careful stitch. The truth, she knew, was like a melody waiting to be played, and Miss Marple was determined to find its tune. Chapter 6. Whispers in the pews. The afternoon light streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Bartholomew's Church, painting the pews with patches of ruby and sapphire. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of beeswax and old hymen, a quiet counterpoint to the tension that hummed beneath the surface of the choir's rehearsal. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual pew, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, unhurried rhythm, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. The tampered music sheet, its erased high C and smudged fingerprints now a constant presence in her thoughts, lay safely in her handbag. She had come to observe, to listen not just to the music, but to the unspoken notes of suspicion and secrecy that played among the choir members. Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, recovered but pale, stood before the choir, his baton, a symbol of reclaimed authority. His collapse 2 days prior had shaken the village, and his determination to resume rehearsals spoke of a stubborn pride that Miss Marple found both admirable and telling. The choir members, arranged in their usual formation, sang with a forced unity, their voices blending but their glances betraying unease. Mrs. Elspeth, Grayson's soprano, soared with its customary force, though her sharp eyes darted toward her fellow singers, as if seeking a culprit. Mr. Thomas Biddle, the tenor, fidgeted with his hymn book, his nervousness a palpable undercurrent. Miss Clara Henshaw, the alto, kept her gaze fixed on the music, her silence a shield, and Mr. Lionel Drake, at the organ, played with a controlled intensity, his fingers precise but his expression guarded. Miss Marple's attention was drawn to the dynamics between them, the subtle interplay of looks and gestures that spoke louder than words. She had seen such patterns before in St. Mary Mead's small tensions that hinted at larger truths, like ripples on a pond betraying a stone's fall. Her conversation with Clara at the village shop had confirmed Mr. Drake's ambition, his desire to lead the choir, a motive that aligned with the tampered sheet. Yet ambition alone was not proof, and Miss Marple knew the importance of patience, of letting the truth emerge like a melody taking shape. The rehearsal began with a familiar hymn, "O God, our help in ages past, its stately cadence a contrast to the discord of the previous day. Mr. Hawthorne conducted with vigor, though Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hand, a lingering effect of his shock. As the choir sang, she watched Mrs. Grayson, whose imperious manner seemed to challenge Mr. Hawthorne's authority. At one point, she interrupted, her voice cutting through the music. "Clara, dear, your pitch is off again," she said, her tone laced with condescension. Clara flushed, her hands tightening on her hymn book, and Miss Marple made a mental note. Mrs. Grayson's sharpness could be mere temperament, but it might also mask a deeper rivalry. Mr. Biddle, standing beside Clara, shifted uncomfortably, his spectacles slipping as he glanced toward Mr. Drake. The organist, high in his loft, seemed detached, his music flawless but his eyes restless, scanning the choir below. Miss Marple recalled a village seamstress who had sabotaged a rival's embroidery, her motive a mix of envy and a desire for recognition. Could Mrs. Grayson, she wondered, have tampered with the sheet to undermine Clara, or even Mr. Hawthorne? Or was Mr. Drake's ambition the louder note, drowning out the others? As the hymn ended, Mr. Hawthorne paused, his baton lowering. "We must be perfect for the harvest festival," he said, his voice firm but strained. "No more mistakes." His eyes swept the choir, lingering on Mr. Drake, and Miss Marple noted the brief tension between them, a silent clash of wills. She thought of a local farmer who had once sabotaged a neighbor's crop, driven by a grudge over a shared fence. Small communities, she knew, bred such resentments, and the choir was no exception. During a brief break, Miss Marple approached Clara, who stood alone near the choir stalls, her expression troubled. "You're doing splendidly, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone warm. "It must be difficult, singing under such scrutiny." She gestured vaguely toward Mrs. Grayson, who was now lecturing Mr. Biddle on posture. Clara's lips parted, then closed, as if weighing her words. "It's hard," Clara admitted, her voice low. "Mrs. Grayson always notices when I falter, and Mr. Hawthorne is so particular. I try, but—" She trailed off, her eyes darting toward the organ loft. "I heard something, Miss Marple, before the last rehearsal, I mean." Mr. Drake was talking. To himself, or maybe someone else, in the vestry. He said he'd do anything to lead the choir, that Mr. Hawthorne was holding us back. Her words came in a rush, her cheeks flushing with the effort of speaking. Miss Marple's needles paused, her interest sharpening. "Did he, now?" she said, her tone encouraging. "That's most interesting, Clara. And did you see him near the music stand that day?" She kept her voice gentle, knowing that pushing too hard might silence the young woman. Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her sleeve. I'm not sure. He's always there early, arranging things. I didn't think it was odd at the time." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple sensed her fear of implicating someone so central to the choir. She recalled a shy housemaid in St. Mary Mead who had overheard a theft being planned but hesitated to speak, fearing she'd be dismissed. Clara's reluctance, she suspected, stemmed from a similar dread. "You've a keen eye, Clara," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "It's the quiet ones who see the most, I find. Don't worry, my dear. We'll sort this out." She smiled reassuringly, but her mind was racing. Clara's revelation placed Mr. Drake at the heart of the mystery. His ambition, a motive that resonated with the tampered sheet. But she needed more, something to connect him to the fingerprints, something to confirm his intent. As the rehearsal resumed, Miss Marple returned to her pew, her knitting a quiet companion to her thoughts. She watched Mr. Drake closely, noting the way his eyes followed Mr. Hawthorne's movements, a predator assessing its prey. His playing was impeccable, but there was a restless energy in his posture, a hint of frustration that Miss Marple recognized from a village gardener who had once sabotaged a rival's roses, driven by a desire to shine. Drake's ambition, she thought, was a fire that burned too brightly to be contained. The rehearsal ended without incident, the choir's voices rising in a tentative harmony that belied their underlying tensions. Mr. Hawthorne, looking weary but resolute, dismissed the group, his eyes lingering on the music stand as if expecting another betrayal. Miss Marple lingered, her handbag clutched tightly, and approached Mrs. Grayson, who was adjusting her hat with a flourish. "Mrs. Grayson, you sing so beautifully," Miss Marple said, her tone admiring. "It must be a challenge, keeping such a high standard under Mr. Hawthorne's direction." Her words were calculated, inviting confidences, and she watched as Mrs. Grayson's expression softened, flattered by the praise. "It is," Mrs. Grayson said, her voice carrying a hint of pride. "Reginald is a perfectionist, but that's what makes us the best choir in the county. Of course, some people don't appreciate his methods." Her gaze flicked toward Mr. Drake, who was gathering his music, and Miss Marple noted the disdain in her eyes. "Some people, perhaps, have their own ideas," Miss Marple said, her tone neutral. "Mr. Drake, for instance, he seems so talented. I hear he's keen to modernize the choir's repertoire." She let the comment hang, watching for a reaction. Mrs. Grayson's lips pursed. "Lionel's full of grand ideas," she said, her tone sharp. "He thinks he could do better than Reginald, but he lacks discipline. Always pushing for new hymns, as if our traditions aren't good enough." Her words were laced with contempt, and Miss Marple wondered if her rivalry with Drake was more personal than musical. She recalled a village matron who had clashed with a newcomer over the Women's Institute presidency, her pride masking a deeper insecurity. "Thank you, Mrs. Grayson," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "It's so helpful to understand the choir's dynamics." She moved away, her mind cataloguing the exchange. Mrs. Grayson's hostility toward Drake suggested a rift. But was it enough to prompt sabotage? Or was her sharpness a deflection, hiding her own involvement? As the choir dispersed, Miss Marple lingered in the church, her eyes drawn to the music stand. She approached it, her movements unobtrusive, and examined the remaining sheets. They were neatly arranged, a testament to Mr. Hawthorne's Walker's meticulousness, but she noted a faint pencil mark on one, a trace of carelessness that echoed the tampered sheet. She thought of a village baker who had once tampered with a rival's recipe, his motive a desire to stand out. The choir, she suspected, was a similar stage, its members vying for prominence in subtle, shadowed ways. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting a steady rhythm as she pondered the day's observations. Clara's revelation about Drake's ambition was a crucial note, but the fingerprints remained elusive, their blurred whirls a challenge. She would return to Constable Reed tomorrow, she decided, to see if he had made progress, and she would watch the choir closely. For each member held a piece of the puzzle: Mrs. Grayson's pride, Mr. Biddle's nerves, Clara's secrets, and Drake's burning ambition. The truth, she knew, was like a hymn, its melody hidden until the right notes were struck, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to play them. Chapter 7. The Music Sheet's Tale. The soft glow of a late afternoon sun filtered through the leaded windows of St. Bartholomew's Church, casting dappled patterns across the stone floor. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, stood in the choir loft, her eyes scanning the rows of music sheets stored in a polished oak cabinet. The tampered sheet, with its erased high C and smudged fingerprints, remained. In her handbag, a silent partner in her quest for truth. The choir's rehearsal the previous day had deepened her suspicions, particularly of Mr. Lionel Drake, whose ambition seemed to pulse like a discordant note beneath his polished demeanour. Yet Miss Marple knew that suspicion alone was not enough. She needed evidence, and the music sheets, she believed, might hold the key to unravelling the mystery. The church was quiet, save for the faint creak of the organ's bellows and the distant coo of pigeons in the eaves. Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, now fully recovered but still shaken, had entrusted Miss Marple with access to the choir's music collection, his trust born of desperation to restore order. The vicar, Mr. Clement, had accompanied her briefly, his kindly face creased with worry. "I hope you find something, Jane," he had said before returning to his duties. "The choir's harmony is fraying, and the harvest festival is only days away." Miss Marple had nodded, her expression serene, but her mind was as sharp as the knitting needles tucked in her bag. The music cabinet, its shelves meticulously organized, held scores for hymns and anthems, each sheet labelled in Mr. Hawthorne's precise hand. Miss Marple examined them carefully, her gloved fingers turning pages with the care of a librarian handling rare manuscripts. The sheets were pristine, their edges crisp, a testament to the conductor's fastidiousness. Yet, as she reached the section for all things bright and beautiful, the hymn disrupted by the erased note, she paused. One sheet, tucked slightly askew, bore a faint pencil mark beneath a line of music, a subtle anomaly that echoed the tampered sheet in her possession. She held it to the light, noting the mark's similarity as smudge, not an erasure, but suggestive of a hasty hand. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, where a single misplaced stitch in a quilt had revealed a theft at the Women's Institute. Small details, she knew, could unravel great secrets, and this mark was a thread worth pulling. She replaced the sheet, her mind cataloguing the find, and continued her search, her fingers pausing on each page, as if reading a story written in notes and rests. The choir's routine, she reasoned, was a delicate balance, and any disruption, however small, could point to the culprit. As she worked, her thoughts returned to the choir members, Mrs. Elspeth Grayson, with her commanding soprano and sharper tongue, wielded influence, but lacked the subtlety for such a covert act. Mr. Thomas Biddle, the nervous tenor, seemed too flustered to execute a precise sabotage, though his anxiety hinted at hidden knowledge. Miss Clara Henshaw, the reticent alto, had revealed Mr. Drake's ambition, her words a whispered clue that resonated with Miss Marple's suspicions, and Mr. Drake himself, the organist, with his restless energy and modern ideas, was the most likely to have tampered with the sheet. His motive a desire to unseat Mr. Hawthorne and claim the conductor's baton. The church door creaked open, and Miss Marple turned to see Mr. Biddle entering, his spectacles glinting in the dim light. His steps were hesitant, his hymn book clutched tightly, as if it were a talisman against the choir's troubles. "Oh, Miss Marple," he stammered, startled to find her there. I just came to check the music for tomorrow. Mr. Hawthorne asked me to make sure everything's in order." His voice trembled, and Miss Marple noted the beads of sweat on his brow, a sign of nerves that went beyond his usual anxiety. "How thoughtful of you, Mr. Biddle," she said, her tone warm but her eyes keen. It's so important to keep things tidy, isn't it? Especially after such an unsettling incident. She gestured to the cabinet, her smile disarming. I was just admiring Mr. Hawthorne's organization. Though I did notice a small mark on one of the sheets. Nothing serious, I'm sure, but it's curious, don't you think? Biddle's fingers tightened on his hymn book, and he adjusted his spectacles, a nervous habit Miss Marple had come to. Recognize a mark, he said, his voice high. I wouldn't know. I don't handle the sheets much. Mr. Drake usually sets them out. His words came too quickly, and Miss Marple's interest sharpened. She recalled a village shopkeeper who had stammered similarly when questioned about a missing jar of preserves, his guilt betrayed by his haste to deflect. Mr. Drake, you say, she prompted, her tone gentle. He's so diligent, always. Preparing the music. I suppose he's often here alone before rehearsals. She let the question hang, watching as Biddle's eyes darted toward the organ loft, now empty but still resonant with Drake's presence. Why is sometimes, Biddle said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's here early, arranging things. I saw him at the stand before it happened. He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he'd said too much, and Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. Her manner, that of a kindly aunt soothing a nervous child. You've a good memory, Mr. Biddle, she said. It's the small things that matter, I find, like a note in a hymn or a mark on a sheet. She turned back to the cabinet, her fingers brushing the marked sheet, and made a mental note to compare it with the tampered one. Biddle's revelation placed Drake at the music stand, a detail that aligned with Clara's earlier confession. The organist's opportunity, combined with his ambition, was a melody growing clearer in Miss Marple's mind. As Biddle mumbled an excuse and hurried out, Miss Marple lingered, her thoughts turning to the fingerprints. Constable Reed had confirmed. The smudges were partial, too blurred for a definitive match, but their presence suggested intent. She recalled a village gardener who had left a smudged print on a stolen trowel, his carelessness, his undoing. If Drake was the culprit, she reasoned, he might have been careless in his haste, leaving traces that could be traced back to him. Her next stop was the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was preparing for an evening meeting of the Women's Institute. The vicar's wife greeted Miss Marple with her usual warmth, though her eyes betrayed a lingering unease. Jane, you've been at the church again, haven't you? She said, pouring tea. I do hope you're finding answers. The choirs. In such a state, Mr. Hawthorne's determined to carry on, but everyone's on edge. She lowered her voice. Mrs. Grayson's been particularly sharp, and poor Clara looks ready to cry. Miss Marple accepted the tea, her expression serene. A choir, my dear, is like a garden, she said. Each voice has its place, but weeds can creep in, disrupting the whole. She sipped her tea, her mind on the marked sheet. I found something curious in the music cabinet, a small mark, not unlike the smudges on our tampered sheet. It makes me wonder who handles the music before rehearsals. Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. You think it's connected? Oh, Jane, you're so clever. But who would do such a thing? Mr. Drake's always fussing with the sheets, but he's so dedicated. Surely he wouldn't. She trailed off, her loyalty to the choir warring with her curiosity. Miss Marple's smile was gentle. Dedication, my dear, can sometimes mask other motives, she said. I recall a young man in St. Mary Mead who was devoted to his roses, yet he clipped his rival's blooms to ensure his own won the prize. People can surprise us. She did not mention Drake by name, but her thoughts were fixed on him. His ambition, Clara's whispered revelation, Biddle's nervous admission all pointed to the organist as the likely saboteur, but she needed more than circumstance. As evening fell, Miss Marple returned to her cottage, the village settling into its quiet rhythm. She sat by her fire, her knitting a steady companion, and drew the tampered sheet from her handbag. The erased high C, a note Mr. Hawthorne had insisted the choir perfect, was no random choice. She was certain. It was a strike at his authority, designed to unsettle him and perhaps discredit his leadership. She thought of the marked sheet in the cabinet, its faint pencil trace, a clue that echoed the smudges. If she could link them to Drake, she might have her proof. She resolved to visit. Constable Reed again, to press for further analysis of the fingerprints. She would also speak with Mr. Hawthorne, to understand why the high C was so significant, and whether Drake had a particular grievance tied to it. The choir, she knew, was a microcosm of human nature, its members bound by pride, envy, and ambition. Each was a note in a complex melody, and Miss Marple was determined to find the one that jarred as her needles clicked. She recalled a village seamstress who had uncovered a theft by noticing a single mismatched thread. The music sheets, with their marks and smudges, were her threads, and she would follow them to the truth. The harvest festival loomed, its promise of harmony a stark contrast to the choir's discord. Miss Marple's thoughts were clear, her purpose unwavering. The music sheet's tale was not yet finished, but she would see it through, note by careful note. Chapter 8. The confrontation. The soft glow of candlelight flickered in the vestry of St. Bartholomew's Church, casting long shadows across the oak-panelled walls and the worn tapestry of St. Cecilia. The air was heavy with the scent of wax and old parchment, a fitting backdrop for the gathering Miss Jane Marple had orchestrated. The choir members, summoned under the pretext of discussing the upcoming harvest festival, sat in a semicircle of chairs, their faces a study in unease. Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, his pallor still evident but his posture resolute, occupied the centre, his baton resting on the table like a sceptre. The vicar, Mr. Clement, stood near the door, his kindly face creased with apprehension, while Mrs. Clement hovered with a tray of tea, her nervous chatter a thin veil over the tension. Constable Reed, his uniform crisp but his expression wary, stood by the window, his presence a silent acknowledgment of Miss Marple's persistence, and Miss Marple herself, seated unobtrusively in a corner, her knitting needles silent in her bag, observed the scene with her characteristic calm, her sharp eyes missing nothing, the tampered music sheet, its erased high C and smudged fingerprints. Now a familiar weight in her handbag had led her to this moment. Her inquiries through the church's music cabinet, her conversations with Clara Henshaw and Thomas Biddle, and her subtle probing of Lionel Drake had woven a pattern she could no longer ignore. The choir's discord, she was certain, stemmed from ambition and Mr. Drake, with his restless energy and modern aspirations, was the key. Yet Miss Marple knew that certainty was not proof, and proof required a careful hand. She had arranged this meeting to draw out the truth, to let the culprit's own words betray them. Much as a village gossip in St. Mary Mead had once revealed a theft by boasting to freely. Mr. Clement cleared his throat, his voice gentle but strained. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his eyes flickering toward Miss Marple. "With the harvest festival approaching, we must ensure our choir is united. Miss Marple has insights to share about the recent incident, and I trust will resolve this matter with Christian charity." His words were met with uneasy glances, the choir members shifting in their seats. Mrs. Elspeth Grayson, her soprano pride undimmed, sat with arms crossed, her lips pursed as if ready to challenge any accusation. Mr. Biddle, his spectacles glinting, in the candlelight, clutched his hymn book, his fingers trembling. Miss Henshaw, her eyes downcast, seemed to shrink into her chair, while Mr. Drake, leaning casually against the wall, wore a smile that was too smooth, too practiced. Miss Marple rose, her movements deliberate, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. "My dear friends," she began, her voice soft but carrying the quiet authority of one who had unraveled many a village mystery. "I am no musician, but I know that a choir, like a village, thrives on harmony. A single wrong note can disrupt the whole, as we saw when poor Mr. Hawthorne collapsed." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, noting the flicker of unease in Drake's gaze, the tightening of Mrs. Grayson's jaw. "That wrong note, I believe, was no accident. It was a deliberate act, meant to unsettle our conductor and perhaps the choir itself." She drew the music sheet from her handbag, holding it aloft like a piece of evidence in a courtroom. The smudges, now dusted with Constable Reed's fingerprint powder, was stark against the paper's whiteness. "This sheet," she continued, "had a high C erased, a note Mr. Hawthorne had insisted the choir perfect. Its absence caused a discord that led to his collapse. And these smudges' fingerprints, Constable Reed assures me, suggest a hasty hand, someone meant to cause trouble, and I think we can find out who." Mrs. Grayson's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a blade. "This is outrageous," she declared, her eyes flashing. "Are you suggesting one of us tampered with the music? We're a choir, not a den of conspirators." Her indignation was fierce, but Miss Marple noted the way her gaze darted toward Drake, as if expecting him to share her outrage. Mr. Biddle stammered, I didn't touch anything. I was just singing." His protest was too quick, his hands twisting his hymn book into knots. Miss Henshaw remained silent, her fingers clasped tightly, her face pale. Drake's smile held, but his eyes were wary, like those of a fox scenting a trap. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, her tone gentle. "I'm suggesting, Mrs. Grayson, that someone had a reason to disrupt the rehearsal," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, I've seen small acts, misplaced letter, a tampered recipe reveal, great motives, ambition, perhaps, or jealousy. The choir is a family, but families have their rivalries." She turned to Mr. Hawthorne, who sat rigid, his eyes fixed on the sheet. "Mr. Hawthorne, you've led this choir with such dedication. Has anyone expressed dissatisfaction with your methods?" Hawthorne's voice was low, tinged with bitterness. "There are always those who think they know better," he said, his gaze flickering toward Drake. "Modern ideas, new hymns, they don't fit our tradition. But I never thought anyone would go this far." His words hung in the air, a silent accusation, and Miss Marple noted the flush creeping up Drake's neck. She turned to Constable Reed, who shifted uncomfortably. "Constable," she said, "you've examined the fingerprints. While they're not clear enough for a certain match, you did compare them to a hymn book Mr. Drake lent me yesterday." She produced the hymn book, its cover worn but its pages pristine, save for a faint smudge on the edge. "The patterns are similar, are they not?" Reed nodded reluctantly, his voice gruff. "Similar, yes, but not conclusive. Prints are tricky. Miss Marple could be anyone's." His skepticism was clear, but Miss Marple's calm remained unshaken. She had anticipated this, knowing that evidence alone would not suffice. She needed the culprit to betray themselves, and she suspected. Drake's composure was a fragile mask. "Mr. Drake," she said, turning to the organist, "you're so vital to the choir, always preparing the music, always early to rehearsals. Clara mentioned seeing you at the music stand before the incident, and Mr. Biddle confirmed you were there alone." She paused, letting the words settle, watching as Drake's smile faltered, his hands clenching briefly. "You've spoken of wanting to lead, of bringing new life to the choir. It must be frustrating, working under such a traditional conductor." Drake's laugh was forced, a sharp note in the quiet vestry. "Miss Marple, you're spinning quite a tale," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "Yes, I'm at the stand, often it's my job to set out the sheets. And yes, I've ideas for the choir, but sabotage, that's absurd. I'd never harm Reginald." His denial was vehement, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hands, a telltale sign she had seen in a village shopkeeper who had denied stealing, only to confess under pressure. She pressed on, her tone mild but relentless. "Ambition, Mr. Drake, can be a powerful force," she said. "I recall a young man in St. Mary Mead who tampered with a rival's garden, hoping to claim the prize for himself. He thought a small act clipping a rosewood go unnoticed, but it unraveled his whole plan. Erasing a note, leaving a smudged, not so different, is it?" She held up the sheet again, her eyes locked on his. "You wanted to lead, to prove yourself better. Then Mr. Hawthorne, a moment of weakness, perhaps, led you to act." The room was silent, the candlelight flickering on the faces of the choir. Mrs. Grayson's eyes widened, her indignation giving way to curiosity. Mr. Biddle's hymn book slipped to the floor, his hands shaking. Miss Henshaw's gaze lifted, her expression a mix of relief and fear. Drake's smile vanished, his face pale. "This is nonsense," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You've no proof, just smudges and guesses." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, almost pitying. "Proof, Mr. Drake, is often in the heart," she said. "Clara heard you speak of doing anything to lead. Mr. Biddle saw you at the stand. The fingerprints, similar to those on your hymn book, point to you. And the High see such a particular choice, one you knew would strike at Mr. Hawthorne's pride." She paused, her voice softening. "Confession, I find, is a great relief too. The soul. The choir is a family, and families forgive." Drake's shoulders slumped, his casual demeanor crumbling. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting to the door, then back to Miss Marple. The room held its breath, the silence heavy with anticipation. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and broken. "It was a moment's madness," he said. "I didn't mean for him to collapse. I wanted to show he wasn't perfect, that I could do better. I erased the note, thinking it would throw him off, make him falter. I didn't think it would go so far." His confession hung in the air, a discordant note resolved at last. Mrs. Clement gasped, her teacup clattering. Mr. Hawthorne's face hardened, his hand tightening on his baton. Mrs. Grayson's lips parted, but she said nothing, her pride silenced. By the revelation, Miss Henshaw's eyes filled with tears, her relief palpable. Constable Reed stepped forward, his notebook open, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her gesture calming. "Thank you, Mr. Drake," she said. "The truth is always the best path." She turned to the vicar. "Mr. Clement, perhaps we can handle this with grace. The harvest festival is near, and the choir needs its harmony." Her words were a gentle directive, and the vicar nodded, his expression softening. "Drake, his head bowed, murmured an apology, his ambition extinguished by shame. Miss Marple sat back, her work done, her thoughts already turning to the festival. The choir's secrets, like those of St. Mary Mead, had been laid bare, and harmony, she hoped, would return. As the meeting dissolved, she picked up her knitting, the needles clicking softly, a quiet reminder that even the smallest threads could weave the truth. Chapter 9. Harmony restored. The morning of the harvest festival dawned bright and crisp over St. Mary Mead, the village awash in the golden hues of autumn. St. Bartholomew's Church stood at the heart of the celebration, its ancient stones adorned with garlands of wheat and late-blooming roses, a testament to the community's pride. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers, a serene backdrop to the anticipation that hummed through the congregation. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her customary pew near the back, her knitting bag at her side, surveyed the scene with quiet satisfaction. Her needles lay still, a rare pause, as she reflected on the events that had led to this moment: the tampered music sheet, the smudged fingerprints, and the confession of Mr. Lionel Drake, whose ambition had nearly unravelled the choir's harmony. The vestry confrontation the previous evening had been a delicate affair, handled with a precision Miss Marple had honed through years of untangling village intrigues. Mr. Drake's admission, wrung from him by the weight of her gentle probing, and the silent accusation of the music sheet, had restored clarity to the choir's discord. He had resigned from his role as organist, his head bowed in shame, and the vicar, Mr. Clement, had accepted his departure with a mixture of regret and relief. Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, his authority reaffirmed, had taken up his baton with renewed vigour, determined to lead the choir to a triumphant performance. The village, ever resilient, had absorbed the scandal with its usual blend of gossip and forgiveness, and Miss Marple, as always, had faded into the background, her role in resolving the matter known only to a few. The church was filling now, villagers and visitors alike crowding the pews, their faces alight with expectation. The harvest festival was a cherished tradition, a moment when St. Mary Mead's choir shone, its voices a beacon of communal pride. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, noted the choir members taking their places. Mrs. Elspeth Grayson, her soprano voice a commanding force, stood tall, her earlier sharpness softened by the resolution of the mystery. Mr. Thomas Biddle, his nerves calmed by the absence of suspicion, adjusted his spectacles with a steadier hand. Miss Clara Henshaw, the shy alto, held her hymn book with newfound confidence, her reticence giving way to a quiet strength. A new organist, a retiring gentleman from a neighbouring parish, sat at the keys, his playing competent if less flamboyant. Then Drake's single quotes as Mrs. Clement, bustling past with a basket of programmes, paused to whisper to Miss Marple, "Jane, it's a miracle, isn't it? After all that trouble, the choir's ready to sing like angels. I don't know how you did it, but we're so grateful." Her eyes sparkled with admiration, and Miss Marple smiled, her expression demure. "It's the village, my dear," she said, her voice soft. "St. Mary Mead has a way of mending itself, like a well-stitched seam. I merely helped find the loose threads." She thought of a long-ago incident at the Women's Institute, where a tampered recipe had sparked a feud, only to be resolved by a quiet word and a shared cup of tea. The choir, she knew, was no different, family bound by harmony, disrupted by ambition, but capable of healing. The service began, the vicar's voice warm and welcoming as he spoke of gratitude and community. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the events of the past days. The erased high C, a note chosen to strike at Mr. Hawthorne's pride, had been a subtle act, but its consequences had rippled through the choir like a stone dropped in a pond. The smudged fingerprints, though too blurred for a definitive match, had pointed to Drake, their similarity to those on his hymn book a clue she had used to coax his confession. Clara's whispered revelation of his ambition, Biddle's nervous confirmation of his presence at the music stand. These had been the notes of a melody she had played with care, leading to the truth. As the choir rose to sing, their voices blending, in the opening strains of All Things Bright and Beautiful, Miss Marple felt a quiet thrill. The hymn, once disrupted by the erased note, now soared with a clarity that filled the church. Its melody a testament to the choir's resilience. Mr. Hawthorne conducted with a vigor that belied his recent collapse, his baton moving with the precision of a master craftsman. Mrs. Grayson's soprano led the charge, her voice a clarion call, while Biddle's tenor and Clara's alto wove seamlessly into the harmony. The new organist, though lacking Drake's flair, provided a steady foundation, his notes a quiet support to the choir's brilliance. Miss Marple's eyes wandered to the empty organ loft, where Drake had once held court, his ambition a shadow over his talent. She recalled a village gardener who had sabotaged a rival's roses, his desire for recognition blinding him to the harm he caused. Drake's act, though less malicious, had been born of a similar impulse, a need to prove himself, to step out of Hawthorne's shadow. His confession had been a relief, not just to him but to the choir, freeing them to sing without suspicion. Miss Marple had seen such resolutions before in the small dramas of St. Mary Mead, where truth, once uncovered, allowed wounds to heal. The hymn ended, the notes lingering in the air, and the congregation murmured its approval. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the choir's dynamics. Now restored to balance, Mrs. Grayson, for all her sharpness, had shown a willingness to cooperate, her pride tempered by the need for unity. Biddle, his nerves no longer a liability, sang with a confidence that surprised even himself. Clara, freed from the weight of her secret, had found her voice, her alto a quiet strength in the ensemble, and Mr. Hawthorne, his authority unchallenged, led with a renewed sense of purpose, his collapse a distant memory, as the service continued. Miss Marple's mind wandered to the broader tapestry of village life, St. Mary Mead with its quiet lanes and familiar faces was a microcosm of human nature, where secrets bubbled beneath the surface like springs in a meadow. She recalled a young woman who had tampered with a rival's knitting at a village fair, her motive a mix of envy and ambition. The choir's scandal, though more dramatic, was not so different a small act. An erased note had revealed a larger truth. Miss Marple's role, as always, was to observe, to listen, to piece together the fragments until the pattern emerged. The service drew to a close, and the congregation spilled into the churchyard, where tables were laden with harvest bounty apples, loaves, and jars of preserves. Miss Marple lingered in her pew, her knitting bag untouched, her thoughts on the resolution. Mrs. Clement joined her, her face radiant with relief. "Jane, it was perfect," she said, her voice warm. "The choir was magnificent, and the village is buzzing with praise. You've worked wonders." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes twinkling. "Not wonders, my dear, just observation," she said. "People are like stitches in a pattern. One wrong move can unravel the whole, but a steady hand can mend it." She thought of the music sheet, now returned to the choir's collection. Its smudges a silent reminder of the truth it had revealed. Drake's departure, though a loss, had been necessary, and the choir had found its harmony without him. As they stepped into the churchyard, the village was alive with chatter, children darting among the tables, their laughter mingling with the scent of cider and freshly baked bread. Miss Marple paused to admire a display of pumpkins, her mind still tracing the threads of the mystery. The fingerprints, the erased note, the choir's tensions, they had been clues, small but significant, like the mismatched buttons that had once betrayed a thief in St. Mary Mead. Her role, she knew, was not to judge, but to illuminate, to bring clarity to the shadows. Mrs. Grayson approached, her usual imperiousness softened by the day's success. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice grudgingly respectful, "you've done us a service." The choirs never sounded better. Her words were a rare concession, and Miss Marple inclined her head, her smile gracious. "Thank you, Mrs. Grayson," she said. "A choir, like a village, thrives on trust. I'm glad we've found it again." She moved on, greeting Clara and Biddle, who both offered shy smiles, their relief evident. The new organist, a quiet man named Mr. Perkins, nodded politely, his presence a reminder that life in St. Mary Mead moved forward, its rhythms unbroken as the festival continued. Miss Marple slipped away, her steps light as she walked home through the village lanes. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the cottages, and she felt a quiet contentment. The choir's scandal, though brief, had been a test of her skills, a reminder that even in the smallest communities, human nature could weave complex patterns. She recalled a village seamstress who had mended a torn quilt, her stitches invisible but strong. The choir, she thought, was her quilt, its harmony restored by her careful hand. At her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resuming its familiar rhythm. The music sheet, the fingerprints, the confession, they were behind her now. But their lessons lingered. People, she knew, were like notes in a hymn, each with their own pitch and purpose, capable of discord but also of beauty. The harvest festival had been a triumph, a melody of unity that echoed through St. Mary Mead. And Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom, was content to let the village sing on, its secrets safely unravelled, its harmony restored.